South East Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Well, my final guest this morning, Norah Casey, certainly needs no introduction. Former dragon on Dragon's Den, accomplished entrepreneur, speaker, author, TV star and lots more. Norah, what does International Women's Day mean to you?
Well, I think I kind of grew up in Ireland where if somebody said to me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would never have said a businesswoman. I didn't even know what a businesswoman was. I'd never met one. I think I grew up in the Phoenix Park, so maybe the woman who, sold in the shop outside the gates was the closest that I came to any understanding of what a woman might be in her life. So naturally, my father would spend his time saying, it's a good job in the bank or the civil service, and I ended up going into nursing first. So International Women's Day now is a great opportunity sometimes to hold up women role models and to allow young people and young women in Ireland to imagine that they could be anything in their lifetime, unlike me, who, really didn't see the possibilities of what I might be able to achieve.
And how did you break through that?
So there's always a story. So for every one woman who makes it to the top, and by the way, that's around the statistics in terms of women getting to the top, there's always 9 who don't. And I'm a great believer in telling stories, that if you tell the story about how you managed to get there, people understand that you weren't beamed in from outer space. I didn't suddenly become a dragon or own businesses. And sometimes the most unlikely events create the personality that is required to do a business. In Dragon's Den, we always got the idea. And I've always said that it's far less to do with the idea, much more to do with the person. And the traits of entrepreneurship are all but laid down by the time you're 23. People don't understand that. I spend a lot of my time now. I went to a deaf school myself. So I go back and teach kids as young as 17 about these traits and, learning how to fail and getting that resilience and that risk-taking. The only 2 you can learn in your adult life are really around confidence. And I've always said for women in particular, it's not about competence. They're outdoing the guys, sorry about that now, in terms of third level education, but confidence is what holds them back. And the second thing you learn, and that is really only through failure, is adaptability. So sometimes when people start out in business, the first time the bank manager says no, the first time something goes wrong, they curl up and they crawl into the bed and they just don't have the ability to say, that's a learning exercise. It's nature's harshest teacher, but also the best teacher. And I think if I knew back then what I know now, I wouldn't have done all the things that I've done. I would have avoided a lot of the pitfalls. Just to explain a little bit more about the confidence thing, there's a wonderful thing in our brains called plasticity. So when we're terrified of doing something for the first time, a lot of people run away from it. They don't want to go over the cliff. They don't want to go for that job. They don't want to put themselves out there. They don't want to do public speaking. But when you do it the first time, your brain learns something. It's a little bit of magic, a little bit of a superpower that we all have. That, the first time you do public speaking, and by the way, the first time I did, I had a red rash going up my neck into my face. My mouth was dry. My heart was hammering. But the second time was a bit easier. The third time, now I'm thousands of times into it. And of course, it's second nature to me. But to start with, when all of us do something for the first time, it's very, very nerve-wracking. And the same is true of whether you're starting your own business or you're trying to get on in life, put yourself out there, do something different. And so for me, when I talk to women and young men, by the way, I always try and teach them that we're all imperfect. I didn't go to, first of all, there was 8 of us in a 3-bed lodge in the Phoenix Park, so I didn't grow up believing that I could achieve things in my life. I guess I had parents who taught us self-belief and taught us that we could be anything in our lives, and education has been my watchword. Every time I've started something new, I've gone back and I've relied on education and training and learning to try and get to the next step. And even now, I'm always learning. As you know, I just learned how to dance.
Is one of your key messages here this morning, don't be afraid to reveal your imperfections?
Oh, totally. I think in our lifetime, the one thing that I've always felt very strongly about is giving testimony. I grew up with parents and grandparents who never told the truth about what went on in their lives. Part and parcel of Irish life, probably life globally. We didn't talk about child sexual abuse or alcoholism or mental health issues. We just buried it and pushed it under the carpet. How did we ever progress society? We didn't. We just allowed people to grow up in a society believing that all those things are things that had to be hidden. We would never have achieved the Yes Equality campaign in Ireland if brave people, courageous people hadn't stood up and said, you know what, I'm gay. And then we started to achieve change. So when I stood up and talked about domestic violence and my first marriage, it was painful. It's the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I was terrified of doing it. I completely, underestimated the response I would get, so it's taken me quite a while to come out from underneath of it. But I don't regret it, because I could have gone through my life pretending those 9 years didn't happen. But what would I do to progress society? We don't always leave bricks and mortar and money behind. We need to leave a bigger legacy than that.
You're an indomitable woman, there's no doubt about that, and you've gone on to become a role model for many women right across the country. But do you think there's not enough of female role models in Ireland?
Well, there you go. The answer's in the question. We obviously, the statistics are pretty depressing in Ireland. In terms of the gender pay gap, for instance, we're going up in terms of the percentage instead of down. So between 2012 and 2014, we went from 12 to 14%. Worse, when young women and young men go into the workplace, the gap starts at about 8% in terms of gender pay. And then when you get to senior management, it's 18%. If you look at women on boards in Ireland, we're in the bottom quartile, 10%. You could, depending on which group of companies you look at, between 12.5%, 10 and 12.5% of women on boards. That's just not enough. You need at least 30% to try and achieve change. So there's lots of us who keep talking about, we need more women in public lives, more women in politics. We're lower than sub-Saharan Africa in terms of our participation of females in politics in Ireland. And it's no surprise when you listen to the barracking that goes on across the floor of the Dáil. It's not an aspiration for young women to go into that particular area, Where do I start? I think that what we need to rely on is as many or more young women are graduates than men. They go into workplaces in the same bright, ambitious state that young men do. And somewhere along the lines, they fall off and they don't feel that ladder is worth climbing. It could be partly to do with society, partly to do with the cultural disconnect when you have a child. I was that soldier myself. It could be that they look up through the hierarchy of the bank or the organisation and they see like 15 women and one lone woman at the top, and they immediately realise this is not where I need to be. There's a reason in Ireland why we have higher numbers of young women in microfinance, we call it, so basically in businesses where they just about make enough to earn a living. And they do that because they can't get the kind of flexible hours that they can get in the workplace. I get depressed about that because I do think that people like me could make a difference. And I started an initiative a couple of years ago called Planet Woman. And it was purely on the basis, I funded it myself, about to unveil it. We have an academy every year, sometimes twice a year, where I try and help young women to understand that it is around that confidence issue, and it's about understanding how to speak up for the first time in a meeting or go for the job when you don't feel you're fully prepared, or, go and take a project on that the CEO has asked you for. So for me, there's lots of things that will hold a woman back in life. I just hope that I can help them for themselves not to hold themselves back. Do you understand that?
And why is it important for you to do this?
Because I owe it to, I'm a woman who's made, I made my way against the odds, to be perfectly honest. I think people often look at me and think that, I just kind of magically arrived at a position where I was invested in other businesses and only my own. I gave up an awful lot of my life to do it. I've often thought, somebody said to me that the biggest decision you'll make when you want to be a woman to run your own business is who you'll marry. And I was very lucky that I married a man who worked with me hand in hand to raise our child and to keep the family together, and took risks with me. So I'd like to be able to pass something on to young women who come after me. I do feel that we need to change society, and that when I walk into a company and say, and I'm not, a lot of people, especially on social media, accuse me of being anti-man. Nothing could be further from the truth. Anyone who's had the hug and the reassuring arm-holding of a father, or the love of a great husband, or me, the delights of having a young teenage son, you could never possibly describe me as somebody who's anti-man. All I'm trying to do is to say to people, you run a company with brilliant men at the helm. Wouldn't you love to run a company with brilliant women at the helm too? Wouldn't you like to fly on two wings? And I've never met anybody in the corporate sector who doesn't agree with me on that. But unfortunately, when I say I'd like women to be better, I'd like women to get to the top, often it feels, that men get defensive. I'm the first person who will bring men to the table. Increasingly, when I do speak at meetings, I say, guys, don't have me speaking to the women, I'm preaching to the converted. Bring the guys in here. They're the guys who are mentoring. They're the guys who are going to be potentially the bosses of these women in the future. We all need to understand each other a little bit more.
Now, you raised the issue of gender pay parity, but Norah, how do we create a gender pay parity mindset in Ireland?
So firstly, it's just to knock on the head. People always confuse the two. So obviously there are laws against equal pay for equal work, so if there's equal pay for equal work, it shouldn't be the case that you ever, it would be against the law if you ever paid somebody differently for doing the same job. However, when this came to light, it really came to light in the last year when the BBC and RTE revealed, or their presenters in high-profile positions revealed, they were being paid less than the guys. So ostensibly they're doing the same job. Some would say a little bit better sometimes than the guys, but they were paid far less. And I actually tweeted out on social media a survey that was done of MPs in the UK that showed that there was a gender parity issue there. So you can see that sometimes in jobs where there is virtually, like for like in terms of the role description or the job description, that there is still a gender discrepancy. In the UK, they have a new law, so all companies over 250 employees by the end of April have to reveal what the gender pay difference is within their organisations. About 1,000 have already revealed this. I think there's 3,000 still to go. They're hoping, I think, that they dump it at the last minute, nobody will notice. But so far, what's very revealing is some of the big banks and corporations, you can see that the top paid people, some 70 to 80% of the best paid people in the organisation are men, 60 to 70% of the lowest paid people are women. Now, you could say, partly that's to do with bonuses, massive discrepancies in bonuses in terms of what men get versus what women get. But also the jobs that women get are valued. So you need to ask yourself, are they valued less because they are jobs that are purely of lower value, or are they valued less because women do it? So take, for instance, I was a nurse. So obviously that's not the highest paid job in the country, but it's a very, very difficult job. And I think that sometimes jobs that are predominantly female, of course there's great men in nursing, but jobs that are predominantly female are valued a lot less than jobs that are predominantly male.
Now, you were just back from London where you were attending the Women's Irish Network International Women's Day event in the Irish Embassy. What was the theme of this event, Norah?
It's really encouraging women, I suppose, as Sheryl Sandberg would say, is to lean in, don't stop, keep the button on, in terms of progress. I was a founder of the Women's Irish Network in London. I worked there for 20 years. My husband worked for the BBC, and a group of us started to meet when I was pregnant with Dara now, and he's 19, so I was reminding them last night, do you remember, we would meet every single month, and I was quite heavily pregnant when we said, enough's enough, let's have the first one. And a group of us got together, and in fact our first speaker was a man, James Dyson, and I think that was the first time in my life that I felt like belonged to a network of like-minded women where we could talk the same things. I didn't feel it was overly heavy with bureaucracy, which it isn't. But we do all support each other, and we, as you can see, I'm now back in Dublin and I'm still heavily involved in the London network.
Norah, you decided to sell 6 magazine titles from your publishing company Harmonia, including Irish Tatler and Food and Wine magazine, to the US-based Irish Central News site. Why did you feel was now the right time to sell?
To be honest with you, 5 years ago was the right time to sell. Richard died, but I just couldn't do it. So I loved that company. I still remember the day when I bought it. It was an MBO, management buyout. I was trying to buy it for 2 years. I remember walking out of the solicitor's office feeling like I was on cloud nine. It was apart from marrying Richard and having Dara, I can never remember a happier feeling or the high of knowing that I was going to be my own boss. And then, of course, as Richard and he left the BBC, he came on board with me in the business, and over the course of, I have to say, many bottles of wine and New Year's Eve promises and pledges, we had a whole life planned for ourselves as what we were going to do with the business. In fact, the year before he died, we'd gone off for 4 months to Australia, New Zealand and Asia, and we were brokering licenses with all sorts of international partners. We had big, big ambitions. And then, life threw me a curveball, and from diagnosis to death, it was just a few months, and suddenly, as much as, I desperately missed Richard, I also had no future. So I really fell into, a period in my life where I naturally always rely on work, and I found myself presented on News Talk for a year and a half, and did another year as a weekly presenter. I was getting up at 4 a.m. to do that, and then RT said, would you do the afternoon show in Cork? I said, yeah, I'm your woman, definitely. I'll head off to Cork after I've done the News Talk show, and then I did 13 episodes of something called The Takeover for RTE2. I just finished another season of Dragon's Den. So to say that I filled my time would be an understatement. And 2.5 years later, having, by the way, in the middle of that, written a book, I suddenly stopped and said enough's enough. And I've been an absentee landlady of that business for some time. My brother's been running it. I love the staff, I love the business, but I haven't been as connected as I should have been as an owner. I've been virtually, working full-time in radio and TV. So I should have made this decision some time ago, but at least, ironically, talking about domestic violence was a big catalyst in my life to clear things out. So I took a decision there and then that I was going to move on, sell the business. The business is based in premises in Dundrum for sale, has been for about 4 weeks. My London house, which I started with Richard, and I've been clinging on to. I have tenants in there, but I said goodbye to them at Christmas, and it's on the market 3 days ago. I put it on the market. So I think you could safely say I'm decluttering my life. And I'm excited about a new chapter. I kept Woman's Way, which is close to my heart. I love the team. I love Woman's Way. It's great. It's weekly. And Planet Woman is obviously my life. My whole life is about Planet Woman and helping women in all sorts of walks of life. So I'm interested as to what the next chapter will bring.
I've no doubt it will be full of excitement, and I think it's only apt to conclude this morning's interview by asking you to explain a little bit about the Planet Woman Academy, which is taking place on Friday the 11th of May.
So I've been doing this for quite some time, ever since my News Talk days. I got it into my head that I was so tired of listening to depressing statistics around women and PowerPoints and people talking at me. And exactly to my point, that if I just asked women, I know loads of women in business and their backstories are as flawed as mine is. And I said, guys, would you ever do something for me? Could I sit down on a sofa with you and talk to you and allow young women to see that actually from all sorts of different backgrounds, you can make it in life, And they said yes. In the first year, I had politicians, I had pretty famous businesswomen sitting on that sofa. They were all honest and they were real. And I knew that I connected with people. I'm not a great believer. I hate motivational speaking. I hate all that rah-rah and getting people to jump and dance in the aisle and then 4 days later they've forgotten about it. If you really want to ignite somebody to get into a growth mindset, to get into the idea that they can be powerful in their lives and they can do something, you need to get right inside their brain. You need to find that much deeper ignition. So Planet Woman is all about that. I'm telling you, there are thousands of women who have been through that, my alumni of the Academy, and I know I've transformed them. The ones that are capable of thinking broader and thinking and believing that they can do all of the things they ever want to do in their life, they are transformed. They come back year after year, they write to me, they connect with me. We're probably all connected through social media and the various videos and digital learning stuff that I put out. So I know it's not millions, but in some small way, I feel I'm trying to make a difference to those women's lives.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.